What if I told you the next global crisis won't start with a missile launch, an air-attached quack, or a mysterious virus, but with something silent, something invisible, something that's been growing right under our feet, and we didn't even notice. Imagine waking up tomorrow to breaking news. 2 countries have defaulted. Their banks are shut. ATMs are empty. Their currencies have collapsed overnight. And within hours, markets around the world are in free fall. Flights cancelled. Imports blocked. Millions of jobs at risk. It sounds like the beginning of a disaster movie, but it's not fiction. It's the very real threat of a global sovereign debt crisis. A crisis so powerful that it could reshape the future of nations and the future of your money. Why is the world suddenly drowning in debt? Which countries are already collapsing under the pressure? And what happens when this invisible bomb finally explodes? This is the story behind the world's biggest financial threat, the one nobody is prepared for. Debt. A simple 4-letter word with the power to build nations or destroy them. Every modern country borrows money. In fact, governments need to borrow. They borrow to build roads and bridges, fund hospitals and schools, pay for police, create jobs, invest in the future, and most importantly, respond to emergencies. So debt, by itself, is not the villain. Debt is a tool in the right hands. It builds debt. In the wrong hands, it breaks. But something changed in the last few years. Something major. Before 2020, the global debt level was already high. But once the pandemic hit, countries had no choice. They printed money, borrowed money, and took massive loans just to keep their economies alive. Stimulus packages, relief funds, emergency healthcare spending. It all added up. By 2023, the world's total sovereign debt had crossed $100 trillion. Today, it grows every single second. But here's the paradox. People think countries borrow because they're irresponsible. The truth, countries borrow because they have to. A nation without debt is like a car without fuel. But a nation with too much debt is like a car speeding toward a cliff with no brakes. So where did we cross the line? When did healthy borrowing turn into a ticking time bomb? It happened when global interest rates began to rise. Think of it this way. You take a loan with low interest. No problem. You can pay monthly installments easily. But suddenly, your interest rate doubles. Now your monthly payment is out of control. You're not paying back the debt. You're paying back the interest. This is exactly what is happening to countries right now. High inflation forced central banks to increase interest rates. As a result, nations now spend enormous amounts just to pay interest on their previous loans. Money that could have gone to hospitals, schools, or development is now going straight to lenders. And the scary part, some countries are already spending more on interest payments than on public services. This is the first sign of a debt crisis, when a government borrows money just to pay back old borrowing. It's the beginning of a financial trap, a trap that strips a nation of its freedom. Next, geopolitical tensions enter the picture. Countries are breaking alliances. Trade routes are shifting. Nations no longer trust each other the way they once did. Economic growth is slowing. Supply chains are fragile, and conflicts around the world are forcing countries to spend more and earn less. This creates the perfect storm. High debt, plus high interest, plus low growth. And inside this storm, something dangerous is happening quietly. Countries are losing fiscal space. The financial breathing room needed to handle emergencies. It means if another pandemic hits, if a major war breaks out, if a climate catastrophe strikes, some countries simply won't survive financially. This is why economists call sovereign debt a silent killer. It doesn't explode suddenly like a bomb. It grows slowly, quietly, until one day the pressure becomes too great and the system collapses. If you think a global debt crisis is something that might happen someday, think again. It has already begun. Let's look at the real world, where sovereign debt is not just a theory, but a disaster unfolding in slow motion. Sri Lanka. In 2022, the country literally ran out of money. Fuel stations dried up. Electricity was cut for hours every day. People waited in endless lines for basic necessities. Inflation skyrocketed. Protests exploded. Why? Because Sri Lanka couldn't pay back its foreign debt. Its economy collapsed under the pressure. Argentina, a country that has defaulted 9 times. Its inflation crossed 200%. Imagine going to a grocery store where prices change 2 times a week, or even daily. Debt forced the country into a cycle of borrowing, defaulting, and borrowing again. Zambia, Ghana, Pakistan, Lebanon, Egypt, several African, Middle Eastern, and Asian nations are reaching the edge of financial collapse, and these countries are not alone. Behind closed doors, more than 50 nations are at high risk of debt distress. But here's where it becomes dangerous for the entire planet. When one country falls, the shockwaves spread globally. A default affects international banks, trade partners, investors, shipping routes, commodity markets, currency exchange rates. A crisis in one region can trigger a chain reaction across continents. It's like pulling one thread from a tightly woven net. The whole thing can begin to unravel. Credit rating agencies then step in. They downgrade countries, meaning lenders lose confidence. This makes borrowing even more expensive. This increases the debt even more, and soon the nation is trapped. This is how sovereign debt becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Fear becomes reality. So what's next? What happens if more countries start collapsing? What does a full-scale global sovereign debt crisis look like? If the current trajectory continues, the world could face a crisis unlike anything seen before. Not a recession, not inflation, not market volatility, something far deeper. In a global sovereign debt crisis, currencies collapse. Foreign investors pull out. Banks face liquidity shortages. Governments freeze spending. Jobs disappear overnight. Public programs shut down. Poverty spikes. Everyday life becomes harder and more expensive. Imagine your country's currency loses half its value. Your savings shrink. Imported goods become luxury items. Gas prices explode. Medicine becomes scarce. Interest rates skyrocket. Mortgages become unaffordable. This isn't imagination. This is what millions have already experienced. Now picture this happening in multiple countries at the same time. That's the nightmare scenario economists fear. So what can stop this bomb? It's not simple, not easy, and not guaranteed. Solutions include debt restructuring, unnecessary spending, insisting revenue international, coopération créée, fair global lending system. All of these solutions require something rare in global politics: unity, trust, and long-term vision. Whether the world acts in time, or whether this crisis becomes inevitable, remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. This invisible threat is real, it is growing, and sooner or later, the world will have to face it.